How you guys and gals doing? We recently had the Mooch on the show. Yes, he is a new author. Check out the book. That is why I wanted to give you a little insight to some of the important parts of the interview we did with him. And it's my hopes you go over to Amazon, go check out his book and read more about his fascinating life, man, from street gangs all the way up to motorcycle clubs to being a social worker. It is a story indeed. So check out this interview. You went to Nevada and you were learning about who you were as a person, and it was in Carson City, and that's not Las Vegas, everybody, because everybody, when they hear Nevada, they think Las Vegas. This is Carson City. And you were already in the Outsiders. It sounds like you left them. What was the next step for you in the club life?
So initially they let me leave on what they call the inactive prospect status because I was gone for work. So if I was only going to be gone for a little while, I could come back and pick up where I left off. And they're, those old school clubs have a real tight brotherhood with other old school clubs. So they sent me some references to some other clubs down there that I might be interested to hang out with, make friendships with. So, I wasn't down there long before I was trying to find other people to ride with. But like we were talking about the cultural differences, I go to Nevada and there's like 12 different clubs there, and, the Angels were there as booze fighters. Vagos were big there. So I was trying to learn the lay of the land. And I remember I accepted an invitation from the booze fighters to ride up to a COC because I figured if I go to the COC, I'll see all the clubs in the area, meet some people, shake some hands, which I did. And I had a good time. And I went up to some of these clubs that the Outsiders had told me to hit up. And they just, I was a young kid, I think 23, 24 years old, that no one seemed interested in hanging out with me. They were just like, oh, cool. Yeah, nice to meet you. And they took off. So the booze fighters had invited me to this bar. And this is, like I said, pre-MapQuest type stuff, really, or at least pre-navigation. And they gave me one of those 3 stoplights, take a right, type of directions. And they were waiting for me, but I was waiting to talk to the righteous ones, try and get to know those guys. And so I'm hanging out the COC and everyone had left. And I was like, well, I still want to hang out with somebody. So I'll go find these booze fighters. And so I'm going down, 6th Street, the big one there in Reno, where all the biker bars used to be. And every club kind of had their own bar on that street, which I didn't know at the time, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I see a group of green, and I assume it's booze fighters. So I pull in, and as I'm pulling in, I have to pass 2 prospects that are standing guard, and it's all barricades. And as soon as I pull in, I realize these aren't booze fighters; these are vagos. But I don't want to just turn around and pull out. So right. I backed my bike to the curb, took a deep breath, and walked in.
That's a cool way to be introduced like that. Just be thrown right into it yourself.
Well, and because I wasn't wearing a patch or anything back then, I would wear a sleeveless denim over a leather jacket. It was kind of that hipster look. So here I am. And the first thing I thought of is these guys are going to think I'm trying to look like them, because there was no Vagos in the part of Oregon I was in. They were down in Southern Oregon. So I'd never really seen Vagos before. And the first thing I saw was, they wear denim. I'm wearing denim. I just walked into their bar, so, but it ended up working out really well. And I met quite a few of them and made a lot of connections. And what really struck me is, so their chapter president, Awful Al, had come up to me, and man, I wasn't drinking at the time, but I wasn't sure if I was going to get jumped. Right. So I bought a bottle of beer and just went and sat in the corner. And he came up and started shooting the breeze with me. And I was telling him how I just moved here for this new job. And he started calling and checking on me pretty often. Like my very first day of work, I had a voice mail from Al saying, hey, how was work? How did it go? And so when I'm in an area where I didn't know many people and it was just me and a family member, that went a long way with me. So I started going up and spending evenings with Al, having dinner with him and his family, and eventually started riding around with those guys. And I ended up joining the Vagos. Al started his own chapter. He was branching off from Reno and starting a chapter called Border Town. And he asked me if I'd be interested in joining. So, and one of the big differences too, which I think I talk about in my book a little bit too, is, Oregon, like I said, it's a very old school motorcycle scene. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all, but it's just a different culture, where the Vagos and stuff I met in Reno were closer to my age. There was some guys from like the skateboard and punk rock scene. Mike, you'll know Bobby Adams from 7 Seconds. I'm actually the one that sponsored him to join the Vagos, but he used to kick it.
That's funny.
So there was this overlap of like punk rock dudes, especially in Southern California. There was more people like me in that club, so I felt more connected and resonated with it more.
We'll get to that one. China Dow about Mooch was in a movie, and we'll talk about that. But how important was, because a lot of people don't understand this one, is hanging around with somebody, getting to know them and not just jumping in.
Absolutely the most important part. And you know, the more years I spent in the club world, the more I would try and impress that upon the hangarounds. You know, everyone's excited, and so when you're that excited and your mind's made up, you're like, let me join, I'm ready to prospect, I'm ready to prospect. But I've seen so many people do that because, you know, you're enamored and you're only focusing on the good, and you're missing the things that might not be a good fit for you. The, you know, the all of the stuff that comes with it on both sides of the coin, you don't really get to see unless you're hanging out.
Yep.
Mhm. And what
Hang
did
around
you?
for a little bit longer than just a couple of days. Hang a little longer than just a couple of weeks, you know?
Really, you know, you really want to get to know everybody and say, okay, is this people, like I said, are the way I would always
I
tell
gel
newer
with?
guys is, are these people I would hang out with if it wasn't for this patch? Were these people that I would go to their families, you know, for dinner and stuff like that? Are these people that I would gel with? And I was too young and naive to know that back then, but that definitely throughout the years is something that really stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
So did you ended up joining the Vagos? Yes.
Correct. Yeah, I was a Vaga for just short of 2 years.
And how was that experience?
Man, it was cool, you know. So coming from this old school mentality and these old school Oregon ways, you know, when I first started hanging out with the outsiders, they had one guy that had a night train, and they called him Store-Bought Scott because they all had custom bikes. There was baggers weren't a thing. You couldn't even, you know, they didn't even really want you to have a stock bike back then. And in Reno, there was a lot of, you know, the bagger scene was starting to get a little bit bigger, but still wasn't huge. But you know, I just started learning a lot more, like culturally, about the motorcycle scene as a whole outside of Oregon. You know, as a Vago, I was riding to LA and Northern California, and you know, me and my brother, you know, he ended up joining the same time I did. He ended up moving right after I joined, and then joined with me, or right before I joined. And so we were those guys, you know, we're young kids trying to make a name for ourselves. So we went to every event we could, and we rode to everything. So we were racking up miles, spending time on the road with different guys and checking out, you know, Los Angeles and Vegas and Sacramento. And so I just learned a lot by experience.
What was it like having your twin brother with you in the club?
It's cool, man. It's really cool because you always have someone there you can depend on no matter what, you know. This was way before club politics or anything got involved in my life, but even just sketchy situations, breakdowns, lost or whatever, I always had someone I could depend on next to me. So that was a huge benefit for my whole life, no matter what it was I was doing.
What
Was
were
it
you?
ever was it ever
Oh,
kind of a conflict when you had your brother with you? Like, would they be like, "Oh, you're playing favoritism," or any of that kind of shit? Would you ever get any of that?
No, not really. I don't. I mean, maybe someone else might say that from their perspective, but I never saw it from my perspective.
Right.
No.
So it
In
wasn't
fact,
prominent.
I was always harder on him than anybody else. So it was probably everyone's probably happy they weren't my brother.
Right.
what were you riding during the Vagos?
I had a 06 night train and bought it in 05. So it was like, you know, they came out a little year earlier. And I remember because they gave me the option of fuel injected or carbureted, and fuel injection, other than that old Delphi system, wasn't popular yet. And so I was like, I don't want that. I want the carbureted. So it was the first year the night train put that 200 back tire on there. And actually, funny story about that is they didn't, only the motor was black. And me and an outsider, Spike, rest in peace, he helped me strip the bike apart, and then we sent it somewhere to get powder coated, and I powder coated it, you know, tip to tip, all matte black. And no one else was really doing that. The Gypsy Jokers had a lot of black bikes. Remember the outsiders saying, "Oh, it looks like a Joker bike," but you know, now you can go in and buy it just like that. But at the time, I was one guys with like an all blacked out bike. Like it was when I pulled into Reno, I got pulled over by the cops because they wanted to know why it was all black and what parts were stolen. Like it wasn't.
Yeah.
It's funny how quick culture shift, you know, because that wasn't a thing yet.
What did you said as far as cops pulling you over, what did you learn about motorcycle profiling while you were in the Vagos?
Yeah, Mike and I were talking about this earlier too, just how different it is on the West Coast versus Midwest or other places. But I didn't realize that till many years later, right till I moved. Coming up in like kind of gang life, we were always pretty anti-authority, anti-cops. So honestly, it wasn't a big shift for me because because of the way we dressed and we're all heavily tattooed and stuff. We got treated a certain way by law enforcement even before club life. I definitely saw it firsthand, but it was something I was already expecting.
What do you say to the naysayers within the scene that say it doesn't happen?
Police profiling?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely happens. And I mean, I guess it depends on where you live, but if you live on the West Coast, there's no way you can tell me it doesn't happen or that you haven't seen it, because I couldn't tell you when I was wearing a patch, if I've ever even been pulled over by one cop, it's usually at least several. They're scared. Half the time they're scared for their lives, or they're being dicks, and they don't, I'm a respectful and polite person, but it doesn't matter.
They've got their hands on their pistols, everything's ready.
Absolutely.
No, I was telling Mooch behind the scenes that I was not that long ago, of course, because I had a patch on, I got literally ticketed for doing 3 miles per hour over. Not like, hey, warning, like, don't do that again because I just want to harass you kind of thing. No, this cop actually ticketed me for 3 over. Couldn't believe it.
Now, one thing that a lot of people don't understand when you get in that club, and we're still talking about the Vagos here, is relationships. How did it back then? Because you said you were younger. How did it affect relationships that you had?
I think one of the benefits was that I just moved to this new area. So a lot of the people I was starting to meet were in that club life or were Vagos. It would have been probably a lot different had I done it in Portland at that time, and would have, spend less time with my old friends, more time with the new friends, or was in a serious relationship. So kind of the timing of my life worked out pretty well. But again, that's something that I didn't reflect on until many years later.
Introducing the all-new service from Insane Throttle Motorcycle Madhouse Radio. 24/7 and nothing but the best in 80s till today rock and metal, baby. And here's an added bonus. You can now listen to Motorcycle Madhouse Morning Show with Hollywood and Chinatown live on the air. Go to motorcyclemadhouse.com and bookmark the radio station and get down with the king of biker radio. Rock on.